So tonight we're going to do some strawberries, and the key with showing how things come alive, in my view, is to always add shadowing and highlighting, because that's what's going to give your picture some dimension and make it really pop off the paper. So I'm going to start by wetting my background, because what I want to do is I want to put some of my shadows in first. Now, a lot of times I will not do that, but the reason I'm doing that tonight is very simple. You have to know your coloring. And my coloring tonight, obviously, because it's strawberries, is going to be reds and pinks. And reds and pinks have a tendency to bleed. So if I did my strawberries first and got them all finished, and then I tried to put my shadowing in, there's a very good likelihood that my beautiful pinks and reds would bleed. And they would bleed beyond my strawberry into my background. And I don't want those reds to bleed. So I'm doing my shadowing first. I wet my paper only because I want my shadows to be soft. I don't want a hard line shadow. So I wet my paper first, and I'm using a bigger brush just so that I don't have to go over the area multiple times. And if you look at your pictures, the picture that I'm using as a reference, it is online, you will see where I want to put those shadows. They're not everywhere, but where they are, I want to allow them space to move around to soften themselves. A lot of times watercolor will do the work for you if you allow it. So I am giving it space to move around. I have wet the paper, and the purpose of watercolor is to give it water. You're not going to get your watercolor to do what you want it to do if you don't allow it to move within the water. Okay? That's how watercolor works. It moves within the water. I'm just blotting up a little bit of the paint that moved into my strawberry. And you can see how those shadows have nicely softened, and they're moving within the water. As they move, they soften. It's okay if they get on some of your greenery, because the shadowing color is nice and light. It's not going to affect the green when we put the green in our actual leaf colors. Okay, so while that is setting, and the reason I'm saying setting is you want to allow your watercolor to set within your paper. Your paper is pressed rag. So in order for your colors to set, they have to soak down into that rag. You can always tell also if you have a piece of watercolor paper that I would say, I don't want to say cheap, but that is not of the best grade. And if that happens, you're not going to get the best results with your watercolor, because it doesn't have anywhere to go, and it will lay on top instead of soaking down into the paper. And if it lays on top, the next wash that you put over it, you're just going to take that with it. So you want to be sure that if anything, you get good paper. You can get away with cheaper brushes. You can get away with cheaper paints. You don't have to buy the best of everything, but paper is key.
Any particular brand?
I personally like Arches, but if you've tried different,
Is that the blue?
no. Well, there's Arches in a pad.
Yeah.
But I don't like the pads either. I buy single sheets of paper. The reason being, the pads are pressed so firm that they don't allow for the paper to become porous.
Okay, got it.
And so it's not as absorbent as the single sheet paper. So I'm gonna just dry this real quick with my hair dryer, my trusty hair dryer
Yes.
that I bring with me. And then we can move on.
Where do you get your paper?
Pardon me?
Where do you get your paper?
I usually get most of my art supplies at Artists and Craftsmen in Florida. Yeah. They have anything that you can imagine.
I've never been there, but I'll have to make my way over there.
If you make your way over there, allow yourself time
Yeah.
because it's huge and they have everything. It's a great store.
Okay. You have to dry between each color?
You don't have to dry between your washes, but because I don't want my colors to bleed
Yeah.
into it, I want to make sure that it's dry.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to start with my base. My base of my strawberry is going to be the seeds. So I'm going to do my seeds first, not actually painting the seeds, but I'm going to put the color on that the seeds would be. And then I'm going to use a little bit of Misket. If you don't know what Misket is a masking agent. And it will mask out this color so that I can paint over it and not have to worry about going around all those little seeds, because who can seriously paint
Really?
around all those seeds?
That's what I was
I mean,
wondering.
you just can't. Well, you could, but it would take you a heck of a long time. No. So I'm just putting my wash on. This is yellow ochre with a little bit of burnt umber. And then I am going to dry that only because I want to show you how to put the Misket on. I'm going to put these other washes on first. And because this is a nice light color, you don't have to be really intensely careful with your painting with this. So if you go over your leaves or whatever, it's not going to make that much of a difference because it's a nice light color. Now, if you were using your intense red or your pinks, then you probably would want to be a little bit more careful. But otherwise, you don't have to be. I shouldn't say that. I should make you be careful all the time, but you don't really have to be that careful. And you'd be surprised, once everything is painted, you won't even see a lot of these initial lines.
Are you doing slightly different combinations of the yellow ochre and the,
You can,
I mean,
but
are you, it looks like,
That looks a little darker. doesn't
yeah.
it?
because I'm mixing my burnt umber with my yellow ochre, the actual ratio could be a little different for each one.
And that's probably
And
good.
that's probably a good thing, exactly. Now, the key also with watercolor is when you are painting, you don't want to keep going over something again and again and again. You want to paint it and let it sit for two reasons. Number one, you want to allow that paper to absorb your paint. But number two, if you disturb the paint while it's drying and you re-wet it where it's drying, you're going to get a washback or a bloom of water, and you don't want that on your color, on your paintings.
Yeah.
So you want to let them sit, let them settle in, let them be absorbed. If you feel that you need additional color, then you wait till it's dry and put an additional wash on.
I have a bad habit of not waiting. I'm in a hurry. I got-
And if you would try to repaint while it's just semi-dry, then you're gonna get stroke lines, you're gonna get bloom of water, a water spot, and sometimes that's okay.
Yeah.
But most of the time it's not,
Wouldn't be.
okay? So I'm gonna dry this real quick and then I'm gonna show you what I'm gonna do with the misting.
Yeah, I never worked with watercolors. And I have, no, never. I have watercolor, but I've never used it. I use acrylic. That's what I started with. It all started with Al Middlemas. You know him. Well, I see my face on there. Well, no, that's more. That's more. Yeah. Should have moved that.
Okay, now, since I already put this wash on, this is going to be the color of my seeds. So I want to preserve that color, so I'm going to use a masking agent. It's called Misket, but there's obviously other names for it, and it's just a watercolor masking agent. And this watercolor masking agent will protect the color that you already have on. And I'm just going to use that to make my seeds.
Oh, my gotcha. Neat. Oh, that's neat.
So when I take my paint off or my Misket off later, it's going to be this color.
Yes, I got it.
Okay, but now I can paint anywhere and I don't have to try to paint around all these seeds, because that's not gonna happen.
Does this misket have to dry?
It dries, but it dries quickly. Okay. So while it's drying, I'm gonna do my other two also. And when you're doing your seeds, of course, you want to do them so that they're not all exactly the same distance apart.
Status. I just.
They're the best.
They were really good.
They're good this year.
Big.
Okay.
And that stuff. How much is that? Well,
It's not cheap, but it goes a long way. So I think that was like $11, but it lasts for a long time. So now what we're gonna do is, while that's all drying, we're gonna start to work on our greenery. My greenery, I'm using sap green and a little bit of yellow. I'm gonna put my first wash on, which is just going to be my sap green.
start with the darker color.
Nice and light. Well, it's gonna be light because I'm gonna mix it with some yellow. My first wash will be the lightest and then I'll get darker. Okay, now my first wash, because it's going to be so light, I'm gonna just paint the entire top. I'm not going to do the individual leaves until a little bit later. So this is just going to be painting the whole top. I don't have to try to separate out any of the leaves. I'm just painting it all in this nice light color. And then I will go back in and separate them out and I'll show you how to do that. But you want to keep it light. You can always deepen your color and you will deepen your color. But it's very hard if you put your first wash on and it's so dark that you can hardly lighten it because it's hard to lighten. So you want to make sure that you work from your light to dark. So my first wash on this one is going to be my nice light green. This is sap green mixed with a little bit of yellow. You can see I just painted the whole top. Okay, not worried about separating those leaves out yet. You're going to do the same thing to the other strawberries. But what we're going to do is we're going to try to finish one whole strawberry first.
Okay.
Then you can move on to the other ones, more of just a time thing. Okay?
Sure.
All right. So while that's drying, I'm not going to go to the very top of my strawberry with my pink and red color yet. So I don't have to worry about this being totally dry yet. If I was going to hit right up against my wet top, then I'd want to make sure that it was dry so that my red and my pinks wouldn't be leaking up into my greenery. Okay. I'm going to use two colors on my berry. I'm going to use cadmium red. And because that is so bright, it's really not a true raspberry color because it's almost like too light. I'm going to add a little bit of indigo blue to that. And that's going to tone my red down just slightly. And I'm going to add a little bit of burnt umber to that. That will give me more of a true strawberry color. I'm going to put that color on. But I'm going to make sure that I'm nice and wet because I'm going to be dragging my pink through this. So I want to make sure I'm nice and wet. I don't want it to dry before I have the opportunity to throw my pink in there.
You're getting the wetness through that brush, only not like a previous.
Right, no,
previously
this
with
is all dry already.
I use a lot of water when I do my acrylic painting. It's just, and I get hollered at for it.
No, you should use a lot of water
I
in
do.
your watercolor too.
Well, watercolor, I'd be in like glory, lots of water.
Yeah, that's good though.
Yeah,
Okay, so I have my color on.
yeah, look at the seeds popping out.
See the seeds
Yeah.
popping out? And now I'm going to go in and I'm going to use a pinkish color. You can use alizarin crimson. There's a bunch of rose madder. There's a bunch of pink or colors that you can use. So it's really a personal preference what you like. But I'm going to drag through some of that pink color now through my strawberry, just so I don't have the same color everywhere in my berry. I want my berry to have different values of the pinks and the reds. And because I'm nice and wet, I'm giving that berry the opportunity to have that color flow nicely and blend.
Yeah.
Marci,
Yes.
there's a question in the chat from
Okay.
Marion. She's asking, what was the name of the art store that you mentioned? The
That
sound
is-
was kind of muffled.
Okay. Artists and Craftsmen in Squirrel Hill.
Artists and Craftsmen in Squirrel Hill. Thank you.
So, painted my berry, mixture of pinks and reds, and now have a little bit of texturing to that. I want not only the texturing of the little seed, but I want some actual texture on the berry. I'm going to throw on a little bit of salt. Okay? Now, you want to be careful with the salt. You don't want to salt it so much that like you think it's your Sunday roast. You're just putting on a couple little grains here and there, because those little grains then are going to give you some great texturing, because where those little grains of salt hit, they're going to suck up the paint and leave a little lighter spot on your berry. Okay?
Yeah.
So while that one is drying, I'm going to go ahead and move to the second one. Same thing.
That's amazing.
Just wait. Want to be nice and wet.
I think I might like do this painting.
Yeah.
Oh, you will. And see, and if you go home and watch the video, because this is all being recorded, then you can do it at your own pace. And that's always nice.
My problem is waiting to dry. Of course, I have a hair dryer. I can speed it up a little
Yeah,
bit, but that's
why-
my big problem.
Yeah, well, that's why I have my hair dryer, because I'm pretty impatient like you, so I don't like to sit and wait for things to dry.
It's starting to
Yeah,
take shape like a three-dimensional.
yeah.
What did you say at the beginning, Marcy, that the key is shadows, or what did you say?
Well, the
To
key
get the
is to
dimension.
make something look realistic. It needs shadows and it needs highlights.
Yeah.
Especially if you're in a lighted environment, then there is light on your subject. It can't just be around it. It has to also be on it. It's like if you sat in the sun. If you sit in the sun, you know, you're gonna get a sunburn.
Yeah.
Because the sun is on you. It's not just on the chair or on the shadow or on the grass. It's going to be on you too. Same with your paintings. If you have lightness in your painting or a shine somewhere on your painting, it's going to be on your subject too. Okay, so I'm going to throw a little bit more salt on this one. Okay. And then for the third one, while we're still waiting for these to dry, I'm going to go ahead and paint my third one in also. Now, if you're looking at your picture and you notice that one berry is darker, it's shadowed, we are not worrying about the shadowing right now. The shadowing cannot come on until we remove our misket. Because if you go to all the trouble of shadowing your strawberry, and then when you remove your misket, then none of your seeds are going to be shadowed, and you'll have to go back in and do that.
Yeah.
So we're just going to wait. I know it's hard, but we're going to wait. We're going to paint all of this stuff in first. When you do paintings at home or, in your own time, it's a lot easier also because you don't feel stressed and you don't feel like you have to keep up with a video or keep up with, the instruction as we're going. The nice thing about having these recorded is you can go back and rewatch it and rewatch it and rewatch it and back it up and let it go forward. And so it's a lot easier for you to accomplish what you want, because number one, you are not in a big hurry. And number two, you don't have to, you're not on a specific time frame.
Because if you make a mistake, you don't look at the teacher and say, oh my gosh, don't see it.
She would not care.
I keep telling.
She would not
I
care.
keep telling the guy down at the center. It's my painting. If it's gonna be this way, it's gonna be this way.
Okay, so we're gonna let the salt work a little bit. You can already see,
Yeah, it does make a difference.
I'll show you. You can already see what the little salt granules are doing.
And that's
You
the
can see that?
texture of the strawberries.
Mhm.
Yeah. Wow.
So you want to be careful though where you put salt. You wouldn't want to put salt if you were painting someone's face. You know, you don't need that, but it's great if you're doing like wood or a sidewalk, grass, foliage. That's a wonderful way to use your salt. So we're gonna go back in now. My greenery has dried here. So I'm gonna go back now and I'm going to start to deepen my greens. Okay, I want to separate out all of my leaves. To separate out my leaves, I'm going to use both my sap green again, but I'm also going to have my black ready because I'm going to put my black down into the leaf closest to the strawberry, where it would be shadowed. And that's going to give the leaves some dimension instead of them laying flat. So I'm going to take one of these leaves. I'm going to paint it in about halfway. I'm going to rinse my brush. And I'm just going to soften the rest of that. Then I'm going to take a little bit of my black and put it down in this base. I'm going to allow that to move up the leaf a little bit. And what that's going to do is that's going to show some depth down in to where that leaf attaches to the strawberry. I'll do that to quite a few of these, but you don't want to work wet against wet, so I won't go to the one right next to it. I'll let that one dry, but I'll do this one over here. Same thing. I'm going to go about halfway up, and I'm only going halfway up because I want the tops to these little leaves to be lighter.
Yes.
So I don't want them to be real dark, so I'm only going up so far. And then I'll take my little bit of black, put it down in that base.
Almost let the paint do the work for you.
Absolutely. That's what's nice about watercolor.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is give it the water and it will do the rest. If you show it the path, it will do what you want it to do.
It's amazing.
The biggest complaint that people have with watercolor is I can't get my watercolor to move, to flow, to blend. Well, if you didn't give it anything to move with, it's not going to move. You have to have a nice wet surface for it to flow. Now, on the other hand, if you don't want your watercolor to go somewhere, then don't wet that area. And then your watercolor will stay away from that. So you have to really think in your mind first what you're trying to do, what you're trying to produce. If you're trying to produce something really wet and blended in color, or if you want something precise. If you want something precise, then you don't add as much water to it. Okay?
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to continue with this. We're going to kind of hop around, going up against the dry. And some of your leaves can be darker. They don't all have to be light, but you don't want them to be too dark because you don't want them to, you don't want to lose your nice black, which is really giving this little leaf some depth.
Yes. See that.
So you can see how all of those little dark parts, that's the deep down in sections of those strawberries. Okay? All right. I am going to dry this now just for the sake of getting this going a little quicker, so we don't lose time.
I'm going out.
Okay, I'm gonna continue with my green now, my tops.
That one's so through.
They look real pretty. Yeah, where's the?
Not ready to
Charlie
eat.
said, I'm gonna go out and buy some strawberries.
Not ready to chow down with yet. Now, if you look at your picture, you'll see where a couple of these leaves are really nice and light where they meet the strawberry. I'm still painting my strawberry in with some of my green. But what I'm going to do then is I am going to wait until that specific leaf becomes a matte finish. A matte finish means it's not shiny anymore from the water. The water has now soaked down into the paper and it's a matte finish. And then I'm going to put a little drop of water at the base of that leaf. And that little drop of water is going to do what I told you not to do before about getting a wash back. But in some situations, like in your picture here, where you want that to become lighter, then you're going to put that water in and it is going to wash your color out of the way.
I got it.
Okay, so we're going to let that become a matte finish. And while we're waiting, I'm going to go ahead and continue to paint in my other leaves. Black in there.
It's actually black, blends a little bit with the green, right?
Yes, it blends a little bit with the green. It's amazing what just a little bit of color combinations can do.
Yes.
How it can change the way everything looks. And you'll really be surprised later when we put that little bit of the white highlight on. That little bit of white highlight is so amazing how it makes everything glisten. And it really does make it look real. The other thing that you can do while you're waiting for things to dry is actually look at your strawberry. Now that it's dried a little bit, do you want more color on your berry? Do you want your berry to have a little bit more vibrant color to it? And if you do, that's perfectly fine, and you can add it at any time. So I'm going to go back in and I'm going to put some more bright color here on my berry. I don't want that bright color everywhere, so I'm just going to put it on part of my berry, and then I'm going to soften that with water. So I rinse my brush, dab it off, and just soften the edge. That way, you have a nice differential of color, but you didn't have to do the whole thing, and you don't have a straight line where you painted. You've softened that with water. You can do that with any of them. You can do it a couple different ways. You can wet your area. You don't want to just put your paint on right away. So you're just going to wet it with water. And then I'm going to put some color. And I'm going to let that color blend in through my water. And then that way, you are not choosing where you want the additional color to go. Your water is. And it'll tell you where we're going to go. So there's two ways that you can change the colors of your strawberry. The other thing too is you want to make it look realistic. A strawberry or anything really is not one exact color everywhere. So you want to change those kind of things up.
Now that bright, but deeper color that you just put there, would that be not shadow, is it high? Where
It's not,
area is
it's
it?
just, it's not shadow, it's not highlight, it's just additional coloring. To change the addition, to change the original color of your strawberry. So it's not your shadow and it's not your highlight. Okay, now I'm gonna go back to that leaf that we left become a matte finish. And I'm gonna put a little drop of water down at that base. And you'll see in about 30 seconds, it's gonna push that paint out of the way. And you're gonna have a marking on that leaf, but it's going to allow that part closest to the berry to become lighter in tone. Okay, while that's still happening, I'm gonna go ahead and continue to paint my berry leaves. This is the things that you do when you are painting. You can hop all around. If you are someone that you need to do things in an exact order, that's fine. I am not that person. I go all over the place with my paint and my coloring because the reason for that, I don't have the patience to wait for things to dry and wait for things. So I hop and go all over the place.
It's easier for with watercolor, it looks like, than with acrylic.
Sure. But it not, well, it depends
Acrylic, I do all
because
the
there's
colors.
with watercolor, you can, but then again, you have to, you don't want to put on black if you're waiting to put on yellow. Okay, so you have to be careful as to what your coloring is too, and what you want to put on first or what you want to put on second. So that's key also.
That's what I have to learn. I think.
The other thing too is, everybody says, well, the rule is this. Well, I really don't have a lot of rules. I do what is easiest for me. A lot of people, a lot of artists, especially watercolor artists, they will not use black or white. They say you should mix your black and that you, for white, you should leave your paper white.
Yeah. I've read
Well,
that.
to me, that's too much trouble.
I like the black.
And I like black and I could never mix the color that I get out of the tube.
Yeah.
So I could mix until my tongue falls out.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna get that nice sharp black.
I agree with you.
And to leave my paper white where I want those highlights, I would keep forgetting and then I would be painting over it. So it's so much easier to just use that little tiny bit of white and it'll do exactly what you want it to do. Okay. All right, we're gonna go back in, finish up at least one of these strawberries for all of the greenery so that we can move on a little bit. And see already that you can see
Yeah, I can
how
see
some of these are, you could almost reach down in because you're showing the depth now to these little pieces of fruit. Now, if you were following your picture, there's an area around this strawberry that's very light in color. Okay, so I'm leaving that white right now. I'm gonna do the lightest green around it. And then when that's dry, I'll go over that whole thing with a yellow green. And then you'll still keep that nice little bit of lightness around the edge. These will make everybody want to go out and buy strawberries tomorrow.
That's for sure.
Now, this is the underside to one of those little leaves, so I'm leaving it lighter. And the reason that I give you a picture, a reference picture, is simply so that you have something to refer to. It's just so much
That's easy.
easier to look and see, because especially if you're enjoying yourself and you're having fun with this, you don't want to have to continually think about what it's supposed to be. You don't want to think about where that coloring should be or where something should be. It's just so much easier to look at your picture. Now, on this strawberry, all of these leaves have the same thing done by allowing that little bit of lightness closer to the strawberry. So I'm going to be painting these in one by one, but now I have to be careful because I want to watch these ones to get to that matte finish so I can put that little bit of water in to push that out of the way. So I'll do a couple because they're not beside each other. And I'll wait for that matte finish. Now, if you didn't want straight sap, if you wanted some of your leaves to have a little bit of a blue tone with it, you could certainly put in some ultramarine blue. You could put in some cerulean blue and change up your greens. Perfectly fine to do that. The only thing you want to be careful with is when you do something like that, you don't want to have one leaf that's blue-green and one that's brown and green and one that's green and yellow. It's all the same berry. So you want to have them similar, okay?
Makes sense.
It does. Well, at least we're trying to make a little bit of sense. Not that we will for all of this, but.
So the shadow green is the black and.
Black and a little
sap.
bit of sap.
Is this,
Yep. Or if you want to get really dark, you can just use straight black. You just want to be careful that you don't, get unrealistically dark. I mean, you want it to look realistic, but you don't want it to look outlandish, okay? But again, it's your style of painting. Some people, that's their thing. That's how they like to paint, the really harsh colors, and that's perfectly fine. It's whatever is your thing. So now I'm going to go ahead and put in that little bit of water, push that paint back out of the way. Okay. Now, we're going to continue to do this in between the other things that we're going to be doing. We want to start to get some deep shadows in between the fruit, where the fruit is actually forcing a shadow on the plate. So we're going to get a little bit deeper with those shadows. The key, anytime you're working with any kind of shadowing, is you want to make sure that you have every speck of salt off your paper, or at least any loose piece of salt. Because if you don't, then right in the middle of your beautiful shadowing, you're going to have little salt marks. So you don't want to do that. So I'm going to dry this really well. I'm going to make sure my loose salt is removed. And then I'm going to show you how we're going to be shadowing. And then we're going to get ready to take off our biscuit, shadow our fruit, and put on some of those highlights.
Seems like the paint lasts forever.
It does. Watercolor paint is And you only need a little bit, and it goes a very long way.
Marci, do you think you could get Archie's paper at Michael's?
It's much more expensive than
It's
it
still
goes
one
for-
shape to start.
Yeah. You'll feel a difference in the paper, the pressed paper versus the sheet paper. The sheet paper will actually feel much more absorbent and much more rough.
Yeah, it's different.
Because the block paper, like I said, it's pressed so firm that it's almost smooth and it doesn't allow the paint to suck down in. It almost wants to let it.
It's good for watercolor.
Oh, yeah.
Paint that the paper that I.
I mean, it is watercolor paper. It's just that you can paint on it and you'll probably love your painting. But it might take you a little bit more of an effort to get what you want versus,
Yeah.
the other kind of paper. But if you work with it and you like it, then, I have a lot of vendors that keep calling me and wanting me to try their paper. I like Arches, and if it ain't broke, I don't want to fix it.
Gotcha.
So if you are getting what you want from your block paper, then that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I'm not doing this.
Right.
So
Right.
try it on it and see.
You can try, exactly.
So anything that says Arches should be good, or do they also sell that compressed?
No,
stuff?
they do sell blocks.
They do sell blocks.
So it's really not so much the company, it's the block. I personally do not like block
So
paper.
it's 120 weight or something.
140 pounds.
140.
Yep. Okay, so I'm going to show you now where I would put the shadowing. And again, I'm just looking at my picture where I see the most shadows. If you're going to be working with shadows also, you want to use clean water. You don't want to use the pink water that you have now from your strawberries, because if you put that pink water on,
Yeah,
you'll
yeah,
get a pink
pink.
line. So you want to go ahead and use your nice clean water. So I'm going to go to the area outside of where my shadowing will be. So looking at my picture, I'm going to have shadow around my strawberry and in between my two strawberries here. So that
That's on
means,
this side.
right,
Okay.
so that means now I'm going to wet it out here because that's where I'm bringing my shadow to. And you're going to gasp, but you want it to be a little bit darker than what you would think, because the darker that you put it on, the more it's going to pop your strawberry out. Okay,
Okay.
so
Makes
it's
sense.
going to be nice and dark.
Now, this paint dries lighter or darker?
It'll dry lighter, but not extremely light.
Okay.
So, you have to kind of play with it a little bit to decide how your intensities are. Some people paint very thick, but you should not be painting thick with watercolor.
Yeah.
Okay, but some people do have a tendency to put their watercolor on thicker. The reason that you should not put watercolor on thick is because if you put it on thick, then when it meets up with future water, it's going to wet itself again. And that paint that you thought was dry and on your paper will become wet again and move about on your paper. So you don't want your watercolor paint to ever be thick. Okay? Okay, so now I have just added some more shadow down here on my berries. I'm going to add some more shadow in between my berries. So I'm going to wet above where I'm going to put my shadow and below. And these shadows are being made because of the light source above the berries. So it's causing a nice dark shadow below. And that's another reason why I like working with a photograph. I don't have to guess where they are. I mean, my picture is gonna say, no, that's not where it is. It's over here. And it just makes it so much easier.
And if you don't have those shadows, it's not gonna look.
And if you
Real.
don't have those shadows, that is correct. It's not going to look like a real thing. Okay, so I have my shadows on in between. And I've wet it so that I'm allowing that shadow to move about freely. It makes it a lot more realistic. And then there's no shadowing over here because my light source is over here. So it's coming in this direction. So that's why my shadow is here and here. And I'm going to be putting some shadow over here on this berry. On the table where the berry is. We'll shadow the actual berry as soon as we take the misting off.
So with drying between each application of paint, it takes you a couple of days or weeks to do a painting.
About 5 hours.
5 hours?
That's another reason I like watercolor. I can do them fast.
I do fast too.
Yeah.
But mine's acrylic.
Well, and you'll
Acrylic is
see how
different.
much is accomplished, you know, tonight
Yeah.
with what you're doing. I
Yeah.
mean, we've been here for a half of an hour and this is what we have done already.
Yeah.
So, or about an hour.
An hour.
And this is what you have
Yeah.
done already. So
Yes, yeah.
doesn't mean that you have to go home and race and get things finished, but it's quick.
Yeah.
Because it dries quick. You're not waiting for things to dry, which was my big thing. I don't have the patience to wait for all that stuff to dry. So I like watercolor because I can get things done fast.
No. Do you tape your paper down to?
No.
I see a lot of people do that.
And that's fine. Some people, they tape it down just because they don't want their paper to crinkle or curl. And I'll tell you a little secret with that. If you don't want your paper to crinkle or curl, you can tape it down. The reason I do not tape my paper down is because I like to move my paper around. And if it's on a board that's big and bulky and you're trying to move it, so I do not tape mine down. And then when I'm all finished with my painting, I take it down to my ironing board and I put a piece of white cotton cloth over it. I turn it over on the opposite side. I put a white cotton cloth over it and I steam it and it's perfectly fine.
Steam.
That's clever.
That surprised me, steam.
Well, because it's
Oh.
cloth.
Well, yeah, it's
Rag.
It's rad.
Yeah.
Wow,
Ah.
that's smart.
Now, there's probably professional
Say, "Don't
masters
do
that are
that."
out there right now that just had a stroke. But that's what works for me. It has never, ever damaged a picture. It has never faded a color. It has never done anything that make my painting perfectly flat.
That's great, yeah.
So, again, it's up to you.
Yeah.
Whatever, if you still want to take it down, that's fine.
Yeah,
I
I
just
like
like the
to- I like to
freedom
move
of
it
moving it around, and you can't move it. If it's, well, you can, but it's a
I never
lot.
taped anything that I have done.
Yeah.
I always had it loose where I could
Yeah.
turn it.
Well, and I think too,
Get the
because
corner
I'm
here.
doing a lot of, classes of that, it's easier for me to lift it and show
Yeah.
people, or, than if it was on a big board. I do
Yeah.
have a lot of students in classes that do like the boards, and that, again, that's their prerogative, it's perfectly fine. My personal preference is, I don't like to iron either, but
I don't iron very much, but I do have an iron board.
I do iron.
And Steve
Well,
Iron.
look, I iron the legs of my pants, that's all. Put a crease in it. That's the only thing I do.
Whatever works,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's a great country. I documented my hours of doing a oil painting one time,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe because I don't know, I'm not an expert,
Me either.
but it was 24 hours.
Well, oil doesn't dry, it takes forever.
Well, I don't have that problem because I put it on thick. I just,
I
that
think-
never stops
I
me.
think whatever you need to accomplish what you want. I don't want to say that, oh my gosh, if it takes you 5 hours to do a painting, that's wonderful. Or if it takes you 3 days to do it, oh, that's terrible. If it takes you 2 years and you've accomplished exactly what you want, then every minute was worth it.
Yeah.
There are some paintings that I lose interest in after about 2 hours, and I'll just put it away. And maybe a year later,
I do.
you can bring it back out and finish it. I will say, I have never thrown away a painting until I've totally finished it. Then if I really don't like it, or for some reason I didn't want it, maybe I discard it, but I always finish my painting. Because the first half of your painting, you're not going to like it because it's not complete. There's nothing there to like or dislike. So how can you say you don't like it? It's not done. That's like getting half of a haircut. I don't like my hair. Well, it's not done. When you are done, if you don't like it, then you certainly can. But allow yourself that privilege of finishing it so that you can say that, yes, I love it, or no, I don't. The other thing too, with these watercolor paintings, especially the ones that we're doing that are going to be highlighted at the very end, you will be so surprised at what that little bit of highlighting will do. It will change the entire aspect of your painting. So again, you can't say, oh, I don't like it, because it's not finished and that highlighting is not there yet. That highlighting makes such a difference. And
If you get
people
it
that
in
have
one
been in
place.
my class now for a long time, they will say to someone new to the class, it's so true. Wait till it's highlighted and you will be surprised as to the difference that it's going to make in your painting. Okay, so I'm going to get these little bits of my strawberry stem and my strawberry leaves finished up so that we can go back in and finish our plate and finish our berries. Now, there are some designs on this plate. They're not very pronounced, and if you want to put them in, you can. However, if you don't want to, you don't have to. These plates have a very light design on them of starfish. That's what that little design is. So I'm going to just show you how you would do that if you wanted to. It's real simple. And then we'll get into the other details. So up along the rim, okay, in order for me to show where these little places are that have that little tiny bit of color, I have to make them pop out first. So to make that starfish design pop out first, I'm going to shadow in around it. And then I'm going to soften that just with plain water. Plain water again. One more time. And plain water again. So now what that has done is that has given the embellishment or the raised area of that starfish without actually painting a starfish on. And then that little bit of color, I'm using some burnt sienna. And I'm just going to lay my brush down. That little bit of color. That's all you need to do. You're actually just going around those areas. And that is what's going to pop out the raised embellished area. I am going to get a little bit darker along this rim. And I'm just going to soften that with some water. So I'm doing all of my shadows on my plate and on my strawberries and between my strawberries. They all have a nice soft edge to them. There's no real hard shadows other than these little bits of hard shadows down in my strawberries, okay? This little light area here, it's just a very light green. So all I'm doing is with a little bit of that light yellow green, I'm just going to paint over this whole thing. And that little light area will just stay nice and light. Now, I'm going to take off my biscuit because I want to start to shadow my strawberry itself. So to take off your biscuit, you just rub it and it comes off. It's almost like a rubber cement.
Yeah.
So it's going to come off.
Could you use rubber cement?
You probably could, but I don't think rubber cement is, it's harder to put on. It's not as, it's real thick.
It come out as a gloss.
So,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, I just asked, that's all.
Now, what if you didn't take all the biscuit off? Would that be okay? You had some that would be a little subtle difference in yellow color.
It's sticky. So
You want
you'd
it
want
off.
to take it off. Yeah. If you want to change up the color, okay, you can always go in and paint a couple of your seeds if you want to change up the color. Okay, but you really should remove your biscuit. The other thing about Misfit is you really need to remove it in a timely manner. So if you weren't going to work on this painting again for 3 weeks, then you need to take the Misfit off and either put it back on or not worry about it. Because you can't allow Misfit to stay on for very long or it won't come off. It will adhere to the paper and it'll be a forever thing. And you don't,
No, it's electric tricks.
you know all those. Okay, so now we've taken off our Misfit. Okay. And you always want to remove any Misfit before you start any shadowing. Because otherwise, then when you take your Misfit off, you're going to have those parts unshadowed. So you can't have something unshadowed right in the middle of a shadow. Okay, so I'm going to follow my picture again, and I'm going to shadow my berries. Now my berries, okay, my berries are not going to be shadowed here because this is my light source. So I'm going to have a nice light area over here, but my shadowing can be along this side. Okay, so I'm going to wet like the center of my strawberry, because that's where I'm going to take my shadow to. And I know you don't want to do it, but you have to, because that's what's going to give your fruit or whatever you're doing a realistic look. Okay. I'm going to put that shadow on over the whole berry.
That's really black.
It's not as black as you think.
That
It's
looks
water-
black.
It's watered down.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you, your heart stops when you
It
see that,
does.
like, oh, crap.
Yeah, when I
It
see
looks
that,
so
put that on,
good.
I thought, oh my gosh.
It
What happened?
does. I'm going to blend that into the water.
It's from experience.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I have this strawberry shadowed.
Looks like
This
you gotta have
strawberry's
rotten
gonna
strawberry.
shadow. Pardon me?
Looks like the strawberry's rotten. on one
Well,
side.
not when it dries.
Yeah, I
You'll
know.
see. And then when you put your highlights on, you'll really be
Yeah.
surprised.
Shirley's worried.
Well, I hope you know, I'm kidding around. When I
No, if you don't put your shadows on, the things just will not have any dimension to them. They'll be flat and they'll remain that way because you didn't give them any shape. The shadow on your fruit is what shapes it, makes it round or makes it however it's supposed to be looking. But you have to have that in order for it to look real.
I agree. It was so black. It's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
wow.
Well, and again, you have to look at your shadows and decide, you can't have an extremely light shadow and then have a really intense dark shadow on that object. In reverse, you can't have a really dark shadow in between and then hardly have any shadow on the actual object.
That
They're
makes sense.
sharing the same, density
yeah.
to a shadow. So you have to follow that. Okay,
Yep.
so now we have some shadows on there. We're going to do a little bit of detail work while that's drying. And if you looked at your one strawberry, you'll see that there are little blackish brown little dots. I don't know if they're seeds or what. I'm not trying to figure out what it is. I'm just trying to do what it is. So along the top of my berry, I'm going to do those little markings.
Oh, yeah, the strawberries.
And this is just with a nice little liner,
It's probably from the blossom.
could be.
Yeah.
And then on my other berry, we have these little seed pods or whatever they are.
Now, why wouldn't the one you're working on be shadowed on that side?
This one, because it is being, this shadow
Shadowed that- but I
here
mean,
on the other side.
Yeah.
I'll put some on, but I want this one to dry first. But this shadow here is
Yeah.
caused from this
I
bear.
got that part, but I kept thinking, why isn't there shadows on?
I just want it to dry a little bit. and
I
then
got
I'll
you.
put it on.
I just thought I'd ask it.
That's
That's the
intelligent
purpose of
questions, really.
asking, yes. If you don't ask, you won't know.
Yeah, I've learned that in my years. First, I never.
Okay, I'm gonna dry this a little bit.
It's really looking really good.
Good enough to eat, huh?
Yes.
I'm gonna put the photograph under, okay, Marci?
Sure.
Photograph, yeah,
How dark that is.
yeah. Sometimes you have to adjust from a photograph.
No. I like the painting better.
Yeah, I do too. Actually,
You got on there.
she's doing it. Marci's doing it. Are you, is this the orientation you're doing?
The stem goes to that.
Stem to the right. Okay, so there, it's there. That's the way she's doing it.
We can actually use.
Yeah.
All right, so now
Move that.
I'll let you see. Here's what we have. We've got my berry, my stem, okay? They don't have to look exactly the same. It's for reference. But if you are like me, I like things to look the same. Kind of like that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sometimes, but, yeah.
I'm gonna add my little bit of a shadow from my stem. I'll get this area first, so I can get that stem shadow, but I want that stem shadow to have a nice softness to it. And I'll put my little bit of a shadow over here.
Getting ahead of myself.
Okay. I'm gonna finish up my other little embellishments on my dish. These are just little things that add to your picture. I
Yeah.
mean, if you don't want to put them on, by all means, don't. It's not that important. But it's some of the things that just add a little bit to whatever you're.
Now, when you started painting that, you didn't wet that first.
No, on this one, I put my shadow on first and then wet the edge to blend it off. Same here. Here's my other starfish. So I will paint where the starfish is and then just blend off.
That's really neat. I never,
You wouldn't think of that.
yeah,
But now without actually painting the object, you know what it is.
Yeah.
And you know what it is just by looking at how the light and the shadow hit it.
Adds more additional
yeah,
touch of realism.
Yeah.
Sure.
To have a plate, have them
yeah.
very on a plate.
Now my favorite part, the highlights. The highlights are what is going to bring life to this strawberry. And the highlights would be where your berry is wet and where your light is hitting that wetness. Anytime you use Chinese white, I always keep it in a separate container so that it doesn't, number one, get contaminated by the other colors, and number two, contaminate the other colors. Okay, because anytime you use white, it has to be the last color you use. Especially with watercolor whites, they're opaque. So if you don't put them on last and you put another color on top of them, they just mix with that color. It's not like you can put white on and then put black through it. It'll just turn gray. So white has to be your last color. Okay?
Dry.
So, and dry. And you always want to use clean water when you are using your white, because even a little bit of dirty water will contaminate your white, and you don't know that. So it's very picky. So I look at my picture and I am seeing my highlights as here, couple little dots on the seeds, over here, a little bit around the seeds. Okay, so that's where you want your highlighting to be. Your highlights, especially with your whites, they have to be put on and the color should be pretty intense. Because with white, it dries, and if it's not put on intensely, it dries and you can't see it. Okay, so you want
Can
to,
you put a second coat?
you
on?
can put a second coat on, or a third coat, or a fourth coat. But it's just a lot easier if you don't want to try to replicate all of the little detail that you put it on where you wanted it the first time. Okay, so on my berry, I'm going to go around a little seed. I'm going to make a couple little marks, a couple little dots on the seed.
It's opaque, but yet it's kind of translucent almost, you know, it seems.
And then on my other strawberry over here, these little white markings is what I feel makes your picture come alive. Because without those little highlights, your picture is flat. But if you, once you put those little highlights on, it gives you that freshness to the picture. It gives you that it's come alive, it's a living, breathing, yummy fruit. Again, if you don't put that on, it's not the end of the world, but it just looks flat. Your shadowing and your highlighting, bring it out, make it look much more realistic. Sometimes you might think you need to deepen a shadow. It's fine to do that, but you want to make sure everything is dry. Do not try to deepen a shadow if it's damp, because you will get paint lines. It won't be nice and smooth. You want to wait, and then all you have to do is repeat the process. I'll do this just for the sake of showing you. If I wanted to have a little bit more of a shadow in here under my berry, you can put it on. And then just soften it with the brush. This is the additional shadows. If this was your original shadow, you would wet it first and then bring your shadowing out to where you wet. Additional shadows, you don't have to re-wet the whole thing. You can just go in and add some shadowing where you would want it to be. If you would want a little bit more shadow under the berry, say over here. Putting that on. And then you'll use your brush, wet your brush, dab it off so that it's not sopping wet, and just soften your shadow. Okay. So you can go back in and deepen. You could even go back in and deepen color on your strawberry. But again, you want to do it before you put your highlights on, or at least an area where there's no highlighting. You don't want to go over that. Even if you've already shadowed it, you can still go back in. Just deepen a little bit up here to show you. But you can still go back in and change the color of your berry, and then just soften the edge with some water. Okay, so anytime you want to do some things, it's still okay to do it. You can go back in and add many layers, but you always want to make sure that your layers are dry. Because that's the secret, that's the rule, that I don't like rules, but that's a good rule. You don't want to go back in and try to re-wet something that is still damp. Because then that brings the original paint back to the surface, which mixes in with your new paint, and it could cause a mud color, it could cause a washback. There's a lot of different things that could happen. So you want to make sure everything is really nice and dry.
And you don't want any highlights in the green, right?
Now, in some situations there, you could, so say you wanted to do a little bit of a highlight along an edge of a leaf, you certainly can. So say I wanted to go right along the edge of this leaf, put a little bit, that would be okay. Maybe a little water drop somewhere. It's fine to do that. Maybe a couple little drops on these little seed pods. That would be okay too.
Distract, you don't want to distract from the strawberries.
You don't want to distract and you don't want to overdo. Okay, there is a very fine line between doing enough and doing too much. And especially with watercolor, because it's a dye, and because this is a fabric, it's very hard to take color off. If you get watercolor on your clothes, the chances of it coming off are slim to none. Okay? Depending. If you get red, pink, black, indigo on your clothes, it's not coming out. If you get maybe a little bit of yellow on, or a little bit of light blue, it probably will come out, because you can probably bleach it out. But it is a dye.
Yeah, when you said dyes,
It is a
because I
dye.
have a habit of my sleeves or my shirt.
I always wear an old shirt, and then I wipe my brushes in my sleeve, you know, but it
Yeah.
will. And the other thing is the misket, never, ever, ever, ever
I'm listening.
use a brush
Oh.
for your misket. It
good thing
will
you said
ruin
that.
your brush. They sell misket brushes, which I personally think are a waste of time. You can go online to Amazon or go to a beauty supply place and get eyeliner brushes. They're disposable. I think you get 100 for like $4. Use those and then you can throw them away. But if you dip one of your good brushes in misket, it's ruined.
What did you use?
I use a little disposable sponge brush.
Oh, it's disposable. For sure.
Yes, they're all disposable.
Where did you get that? At the art store.
Yeah,
Beauty supply.
Yep, beauty supply.
Beauty supply, I go there all quite often.
Just get a little eyeliner brush or a little, you know, something that you can throw away. You never want to
A
put your brush in
toothpick?
there. A toothpick will not, the misket stays on on the wood of the toothpick, it doesn't want to come off. So you
So
won't,
something plastic.
well,
or-
plastic, or, I mean, you could even use, in worst case scenarios, get a Q-tip, pull the cotton off, and then just take that little bit of cotton that's left and make a little fine tail
Yeah,
and dip it in. And you can use that.
One-time use.
yeah.
Yeah.
pretty much.
Yep.
Good thing.
And then you want to make sure too that your misket is dry before you paint over it. Because if you paint over it and it's wet, you've got it smeared everywhere and it's on your brush.
Yeah, throw away the brush.
You would have to,
Yeah.
because it's like if you painted your room with those kind of paintbrushes and you didn't wash it out.
Yeah.
It's worthless then. Yeah. So.
I know, down at the center, now we use acrylic, but
Mhm.
we don't always wash the brushes out.
Yeah. you
I
have-
take my own brushes with me because I can't use them.
Right.
They drive me crazy. They're hard.
Sure. And the other thing too is don't leave your brushes ever sit in water.
Yeah, I know that.
Okay.
I was told.
The brushes are held in with glue. And if you leave them sit in water, it'll
I was
eventually.
told
melt.
cold water and soap.
Yeah.
Wash them out.
I don't
cold
even
water.
use soap that often. I just
Well,
use water.
It depends what
Well,
I.
you're not using.
Well, yeah,
watercolor.
if
Yeah,
you
I'm
use
not
it.
using. Right.